Behind the mansion gates, a father, a dog, and a secret. No one dared to speak. On the outside, the Hale estate looked like the picture of American success. Marble floors, iron gates, and charity galas splashed across the front page. But behind those glittering windows, a little girl's cry for help was locked away. Jonathan Reed, a once proud firefighter scarred by injury and loss, had nothing left but his love for his daughter. Everyone told him to let go, that Victoria Hale, his wealthy ex-wife, was untouchable. But Jonathan couldn't ignore the whispers. His child looked pale, bruised, hungry. When the world doubted him, only one ally stood firm: Raven, a German shepherd, with instincts sharper than any man's. And on one cold night, when Jonathan whispered his daughter's name at the gates, it wasn't silence that answered. It was a muffled sob. The wind whistled low against the wooden slats of the cabin, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and damp earth. Inside, Jonathan Reed shifted his weight carefully as he rose from the small chair by the stove. His left leg dragged slightly, a stubborn limp that refused to leave him, even after years of therapy. Every step sent a dull ache through his hip, a quiet reminder of the fire that had ended the life he once knew. The cabin was little more than a single open room, split by a thin wall into a bedroom and a kitchen. It was warm enough when the stove glowed, but tonight the flames had died down to coals, painting the walls in a soft orange. Shadows flickered over the shelves lined with old fire helmets, medals dulled with time, and a few photographs that bore the weight of memory. Among them, one picture stood out. On the nightstand beside his narrow bed sat a frame, worn at the edges. Within it, a girl's face beamed at him as if the world were nothing but sunlight. Sophia. Her dark hair framed a pair of eyes that mirrored his own, and her smile was the kind that could make even the harshest days worth living. She had been 5 when the picture was taken, giggling on his shoulders at a county fair. Now she was 7, and Jonathan hadn't held her in his arms for over a year. He brushed the glass with his fingertips, wiping away the thin veil of dust that had settled there. "Still with me, kiddo," he whispered, voice low, the words vanishing into the silence. Loneliness pressed heavy in the cabin, a silence broken only by the ticking of an old clock and the occasional creak of wood under the weight of time. Nights were the hardest. He used to fill them with purpose. Late calls from the firehouse, engines roaring, the rush of boots on pavement as he and his brothers charged toward danger. Now his nights were filled with nothing but echoes, and the memory of flames licking at his skin the day the ceiling collapsed. He had saved 2 children that night, carried them out of the smoke, but the last beam had caught him before he could escape. The scars on his back and the limp in his stride were the price of survival. Jonathan lowered himself back into the chair, wincing as his leg protested. He reached for the chipped mug on the table, the coffee inside long gone cold. He sipped anyway, habit more than comfort. On the table lay unopened bills, a notice about unpaid medical debt, and a letter from the bank reminding him that his pension barely covered the basics. He ignored them all. What gnawed at him more than money or pain was distance, the distance between him and his daughter. After the divorce, Victoria Hale had fought ruthlessly for custody, her lawyers wielding words like weapons. She had won, of course. Victoria always won. To the world she was untouchable, a goddess draped in silk and diamonds, her name whispered with awe in financial circles. She donated millions to hospitals, cut ribbons at charities, and flashed her perfect smile to the cameras. But to Jonathan, She was the woman who had once held his hand and sworn to walk through fire with him. Now she walked red carpets instead, and their daughter lived in her shadow. He had tried to tell himself Sophia was fine. After all, Victoria could afford the best schools, the finest clothes, every opportunity a child could want. But wealth was a poor substitute for love. And sometimes, when Jonathan lay awake at night, he wondered if Sophia remembered the mornings in their old house, when she'd wake him at dawn by jumping on his chest, begging for pancakes. The cabin groaned as the wind picked up. Jonathan rose again, pacing slowly toward the window. From there, he could see the faint glow of the town beyond the trees. And beyond that glow, further still, he knew the mansion stood. A palace of glass and steel on the hill, Victoria's pride. The contrast was almost cruel. His own walls were weathered wood, patched with his own hands. Hers gleamed white, polished by others. His world smelled of smoke, sweat, and pine. Hers of perfume, champagne, and power. He clenched the window frame until his knuckles whitened. The world called her a success story. He called her the mother who had stolen his daughter's laughter. Jonathan turned back to the photograph. The smile in the picture warmed him and cut him in the same breath. He imagined Sophia's voice, soft and playful, the way she used to call him Daddy, with a lilt that melted every wall around his heart. He imagined her running through the grass behind the cabin, raven-haired and free. Instead, she lived behind gates taller than men, in a house with rooms bigger than his entire home. He moved toward the stove and stoked the dying embers. Sparks shot up, tiny flares that reminded him of the firestorms he once conquered. His body might have betrayed him, but his spirit hadn't. Somewhere deep inside, a flame still burned. The stubborn, unyielding fire of a father who would not surrender. Jonathan sank into the chair again. The photograph cradled in his hands. He traced Sophia's cheek with his thumb, as though touch could bridge distance. A single tear slipped down his scarred face, disappearing into his beard. "Hold on, Soph," he murmured into the quiet. "Daddy's still here." The words lingered in the air, fragile but steady, like a vow spoken into the dark. And though he didn't yet know the storm that was coming, though he couldn't see the battles he would soon fight, Jonathan Reed knew this much. His life might be small, broken even, but his love for Sophia was vast, unbroken, and waiting for the moment it could blaze again. Outside, the wind moaned through the trees. In the distance, far beyond the woods, the lights of the Hale mansion glimmered faintly against the night sky, mocking him like a constellation he could never touch. The world might worship Victoria Hale, but in that cabin, in the quiet ache of a father's heart, Jonathan knew the truth. He was rich in the only way that mattered, rich in love for a daughter who, somewhere out there, needed him more than anyone dared to admit. The ballroom shimmered like a palace of glass and light. Chandeliers hung above in constellations of crystal, their brilliance scattering across polished marble floors. The air smelled of roses imported from another continent, of champagne poured into slender flutes by waiters who moved as silently as shadows. At the center of it all stood Victoria Hale. She wore a gown the color of midnight, fabric stitched with silver thread that caught the light each time she turned. Diamonds rested at her ears, subtle yet unmistakably real, their glint sharper than the gaze she carried. Her lips curved into the kind of smile that belonged in magazines, poised, practiced, a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Victoria!" a voice called from across the room. Cameras flashed instantly. dozens of bulbs firing like a storm of lightning. Reporters leaned forward, microphones thrust toward her as if her words were scripture. She raised her glass, tilting her head just enough for the light to kiss her cheekbones. "To build futures," she said, her voice low, confident, the cadence of someone used to being obeyed. The crowd erupted in applause. No one noticed the stiffness in her daughter's posture as Sophia stood near the grand staircase, small hands gripping the railing. No one saw the way Sophia's eyes drifted toward the exits, as though longing to flee. All eyes were on Victoria, always in Victoria. To the world, she was untouchable. Her empire stretched far beyond the town's borders: hedge funds, real estate, technology investments. Newspapers hailed her as a self-made visionary, though whispers said she had crushed more than a few rivals underfoot to build her fortune. Those whispers never found print. Money, after all, could silence most things. "Mrs. Hale, the children's hospital wing you funded, truly extraordinary," gushed a senator's wife, leaning close as if proximity might grant her some of Victoria's shine. Victoria's smile widened, but her eyes remained cold. "Children deserve hope," she replied smoothly, "and hope requires vision." The cameras loved her. Photographers shouted for her to turn, to lift her chin, to angle her glass. She obeyed with the precision of a queen indulging her subjects. Behind her, Sophia shifted from one foot to the other, clutching a small doll whose dress was fraying at the seams. If anyone noticed, they said nothing. Rumors rippled quietly through the town, carried in hushed tones over coffee counters and behind closed office doors. Some said Victoria was ruthless with her staff, that she treated her daughter more like an inconvenience than a child. Others claimed they had seen Sophia with bruises hidden beneath long sleeves. But when those whispers reached the wrong ears, jobs disappeared, contracts dissolved, and silence returned. In public, Victoria Hale's image was flawless. She sponsored scholarships, chaired fundraisers, and signed oversized checks in front of flashing cameras. Each act of charity was another stone in the monument she built to herself. The people of the town watched her ascend higher and higher, her mansion gleaming on the hill like a fortress of wealth. Jonathan Reed, meanwhile, lived in her shadow, dismissed as the broken ex-husband, the man who couldn't keep up with her rise. Few remembered that he had once carried men from burning buildings, that his scars were not from weakness, but from sacrifice. Victoria had rewritten the story. She was the star, he the footnote. Back in the ballroom, music swelled from a string quartet. Guests twirled across the floor, their laughter mingling with the clink of crystal. Sophia sat quietly at the edge of the room, her small legs swinging from a velvet chair. A waiter passed by and set a plate of delicate hors d'oeuvre in front of her. She didn't touch them. Her eyes remained fixed on her mother, watching as Victoria accepted another award, another bouquet, another round of applause. Every gesture Victoria made seemed orchestrated, designed for spectacle. When she placed a hand over her heart, the crowd leaned in, enraptured. When she paused mid-sentence, they held their breath, as if waiting for revelation. Yet her heart never softened, her pauses never faltered. Everything was performance. The coldness in her smile was invisible to those dazzled by the light. One photographer, braver than most, murmured to a colleague, "I've heard things about her at home. Things that don't match this." The colleague shook his head sharply. "Keep your mouth shut if you want to keep your press pass." And so the silence continued. By the time the gala ended, Victoria had charmed another senator, secured another pledge, and adorned another magazine cover. She stepped into her limousine, the door closed, and the cameras were left staring at their own reflections in the glass. Inside the car, the smile fell from her lips. Sophia sat beside her, clutching her doll tighter. Victoria glanced at her only once, an annoyed flicker of eyes. "Sit up straight," she said curtly. Sophia obeyed, shoulders rigid, eyes lowered. Outside, the city lights blurred as the limousine sped through the night. To the people waving at the tinted windows, Victoria Hale was still a vision of grace, a woman untouchable. But within those glass walls, the truth lingered, colder than diamonds, sharper than whispers, hidden behind a smile that fooled everyone, but a child who knew what it felt like to be invisible. The morning broke grey and heavy, clouds pressing low over the town like a secret waiting to fall. Jonathan Reed leaned against the railing of the diner's porch, his leg aching as he shifted his weight. The coffee in his hand was lukewarm, bitter, but it grounded him as he watched the slow stir of life along Main Street. Trucks rattled by, shopkeepers pulled up shutters, and somewhere in the distance, church bells rang a hollow note. He wasn't supposed to be here. He had promised himself to keep his distance, to let Sophia's world remain untouched by his own broken pieces. But the ache in his chest was sharper than the ache in his leg, and so he came, close enough to see, never close enough to reach. Across the street, the Hale Mansion's gardeners had begun their work early. Victoria had imported roses from Italy, ivy from England, and men who had worked her grounds for decades. One of them was Samuel, an old gardener whose back was bent like the branches he trimmed, his face weathered from years beneath the sun. Jonathan watched as Samuel carried a bundle of tools toward the truck, his movements slow, deliberate. For a moment their eyes met. Jonathan's scarred, searching. Samuel's cautious, unreadable. Then Samuel glanced around, as though to be certain no one was listening, and shuffled toward the porch. "You shouldn't linger here," Samuel murmured, voice gravel low, words half swallowed by the wind. "She has eyes everywhere." Jonathan straightened, his pulse quickening. "I just want to know if my little girl is all right." The gardener hesitated, his gaze darting to the street, then back again. His hands fumbled with his cap, twisting the fabric as though wringing out courage. Finally, he spoke, the words soft, almost broken. "She looks pale most days. Doesn't eat much. Sometimes. Sometimes I see marks on her arms." He stopped, swallowed hard. Bruises. Small, but too many to be accidents. The world tilted beneath Jonathan. His grip tightened on the railing until the wood groaned. "Bruises." The word caught in his throat like smoke. Samuel nodded, guilt flickering across his eyes. "I've worked that estate 30 years, seen things come and go. But the little one..." His voice cracked, and he shook his head. "She's quiet, too quiet for a child her age, like she's afraid even of her own shadow." Jonathan's breath came uneven, a storm building in his chest. He wanted to deny it, to believe that Sophia was safe inside those walls of marble and glass. He wanted to think Victoria, for all her coldness, would never let harm touch their daughter. But the picture Samuel painted lodged deep into him, sharper than any blade. "Why are you telling me this?" Jonathan asked, his voice rough. "Because someone has to," Samuel whispered, "and because I've seen you, standing out here with that look in your eyes. A father's look. You needed to know." The old man tipped his cap and moved away, shoulders hunched as though the very act of speaking had burdened him. Jonathan watched him go, his heart pounding against his ribs. He sank onto the porch step, coffee forgotten, his hands trembling. The image would not leave him. Sophia's thin arms bruised, her bright smile dimmed, her laughter swallowed by silence. He pressed his palms against his face, fighting the tide of rage and grief threatening to break him apart. "No," he muttered, shaking his head. "She wouldn't. She couldn't." But deep down, he knew. He had seen the way Victoria gripped Sophia's wrist too tightly in public, the quick flinch in the child's eyes before the cameras turned. He had heard whispers in passing, dismissed them as jealousy or malice. Now the whispers had a face, a voice trembling with truth. Jonathan's chest tightened, breath shallow. The world around him blurred, the sound of traffic, the murmur of voices, even the taste of the bitter coffee on his tongue. All he could see was Sophia, his Sophia. The little girl who once pressed her small hand into his, trusting him to protect her from every danger, and he had failed. The diner door creaked open behind him. A waitress stepped out, balancing a tray. "Refill, hun?" she asked, her voice kind, unaware of the storm swirling inches from him. Jonathan shook his head, unable to speak. She gave him a small smile and disappeared back inside, leaving him alone with his breaking heart. He rose unsteadily, the limp more pronounced as he crossed the street. He stopped at the edge of the sidewalk, staring toward the distant hill, where Victoria's mansion rose like a fortress against the skyline. From here it looked untouchable, shimmering with wealth and power. But Jonathan now knew what shadows it hid. For the first time in months, fire returned to his eyes. The same fire that once drove him into burning buildings, that once pulled children from the jaws of death. His body might have been broken, but his resolve was not. He whispered into the wind, as though sending the words to Sophia herself. "I'll find out. I'll make sure you're safe." The seed had been planted. Doubt had become certainty, and certainty would soon demand action. Jonathan turned away from the hill, his limp carrying him back toward the cabin at the edge of town. The photograph of Sophia waited for him there, smiling, innocent, unaware of the storm her father was about to unleash. And somewhere, in the quiet corners of the Hale mansion, a little girl sat by a window, clutching her doll, eyes wide and searching, as though she could feel that her name had been spoken aloud, that her father's heart had heard her whispers at last. The gates loomed higher than Jonathan remembered. Black iron bars, twisted into elegant shapes, polished until they gleamed under the pale morning sun. They were less a barrier, and more a statement. This was not a house, but a fortress. Beyond the gates, the Hale mansion rose with its marble columns and glass walls, reflecting the light like a crown set upon the hill. To the world, it was a palace of triumph. To Jonathan, it was a prison holding his daughter. He leaned heavily on his cane as he approached, the gravel crunching beneath his boots. Every step seemed to echo in the emptiness of the driveway, until he reached the towering gates and rested his hand against the cold iron. "Let me in," he called, voice rough with sleepless nights. "I just need to see Sophia." The guardhouse door swung open. 2 men in suits emerged, Victoria's private security, not the town's police. Their faces were impassive, carved from stone, eyes hidden behind dark glasses, even though the sun was weak and filtered. "Mr. Reed," one said flatly, his voice carrying no warmth. "You've been warned before. Mrs. Hale does not permit unscheduled visits." Jonathan's jaw clenched. "She's my daughter. I don't need permission to see my own child." The taller guard stepped forward, broad shoulders filling the space between Jonathan and the mansion. "Legally, custody is in Mrs. Hale's favor. You have visitation rights as specified in the court's agreement. Today is not one of those days. Jonathan's chest tightened. I just need a minute. 1 minute, please. His voice cracked on the last word, raw and pleading. The guards did not flinch. The shorter one raised a hand, as if swatting away a fly. Go home, Mr. Reed. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Jonathan gripped the gate tighter. Through the bars, he thought he saw a flicker of movement at an upstairs window. Small fingers against the glass, the outline of a child's face. His heart hammered. Sophia, he shouted, voice straining as though the air itself could carry it to her. The guards stiffened instantly. The taller one shoved him back, firm but not yet violent. Jonathan stumbled, his injured leg buckling. He caught himself against the gravel, pain flashing across his face. Don't you dare touch me, he growled, pushing himself upright, his breath ragged. I know she's in there. I heard her. I heard. The shorter guard cut him off. You need to leave. Now. Jonathan's voice rose, desperation breaking through every word. She's my little girl. You think your orders, your walls, your money can keep me away forever? I will see her. I will hold her again, whether Victoria likes it or not. His cry hung in the air, echoing against the marble walls of the mansion. For a brief second, silence pressed heavy. Then the guards moved as one, stepping closer, their bodies a wall of warning. Jonathan felt the heat rise in his chest. He wanted to fight, to tear down the gates with his bare hands if that's what it took. But his body betrayed him. The limp, the ache, the weight of years. His fists trembled not from fear, but from rage and helplessness. The taller guard's voice dropped to a colder register. One more step, Mr. Reed, and we'll have you arrested for trespassing. Is that what you want Sophia to see? Her father dragged away in handcuffs? The words sliced deep. Jonathan froze, chest heaving, sweat dampening his shirt. Slowly, reluctantly, he stepped back from the gate, but his eyes never left the mansion. He searched every window, hoping, praying for a glimpse. And there, faint, almost imperceptible, a curtain shifted on the third floor. The corner lifted just enough for a child's face to peek through. Sophia. Even from this distance, Jonathan knew it was her. Her small frame, her dark hair, the unmistakable tilt of her head. His breath caught. He raised a trembling hand, pressing it against his heart before stretching it toward the window. Daddy's here, he whispered, too soft for the guards to hear, but hoping the wind might carry it. The curtain fell. The face disappeared. The shorter guard followed Jonathan's gaze, his jaw tightening. He muttered something under his breath to his partner before turning back. You need to leave now. Don't come back without an appointment. Jonathan's chest ached, as though the gates themselves were crushing him. His cane dug into the gravel as he forced himself to stand tall, meeting their cold stares. You can push me away 100 times, he said quietly, voice steady now. But I'm not going anywhere. She's my daughter, and I will not let her be forgotten. The guards didn't respond. They only turned back toward the guardhouse, their silence louder than any threat. Jonathan lingered a moment longer, his hand still on the cold iron bars. The mansion loomed above, pristine and untouchable, while he stood below, scarred and dismissed. Yet in that moment, he felt the spark of something stronger than despair, resolve. As he limped back down the gravel drive, each step heavier than the last, Jonathan whispered Sophia's name under his breath like a prayer, like a promise. The guards could shove him. Victoria could lock the gates, The law could write him off as a broken man, but none of it would matter. Because a father's love, once stirred to desperation, is a fire that no wall, no gate, no amount of power can extinguish. The police precinct smelled faintly of old coffee and damp leather. Phones rang in sharp bursts. Officers strode through the hallways with clipboards tucked under their arms, and the hum of radios filled the background with static and half-heard codes. Jonathan Reed stood at the edge of it all, leaning on his cane, his scarred face half in shadow, as though he didn't quite belong in the fluorescent brightness. It had been years since he'd set foot in a place like this. Back when he was a firefighter, the precinct had been part of his rhythm. Coordinated rescues, late-night briefings, the quiet solidarity of men and women who rushed into danger. Now he stood apart, an outsider in a world that had kept moving without him. Then, through the bustle, he heard a familiar voice. "Jonathan?" He turned. Miguel Torres stood in the doorway of his office. The same square shoulders, the same piercing eyes, those streaks of gray now threaded through his hair. Miguel had once been a rookie cop, young and hot-headed, who Jonathan had dragged out of a burning duplex years ago. That night had forged a bond between them, a bond that had never truly broken, even when time and distance tried to fray it. "Miguel," Jonathan rasped, forcing a smile. "You still look like hell." Torres laughed, crossing the room in long strides, pulling Jonathan into a rough embrace. "Look who's talking. You walk like a 70-year-old. They pulled back, and Torres's grin softened into concern. "What brings you here? I haven't seen you in months." Jonathan's throat tightened. He glanced around, then lowered his voice. "It's Sophia." The name alone made Torres's expression shift. He gestured toward his office. "Come inside." The office was cluttered, files stacked high, a half-empty cup of coffee balanced precariously on the edge of the desk, photos of Torres's family pinned to the wall. But it was warm, lived in, and Jonathan sank into the chair across from him like a man laying down a burden. "I tried to see her," Jonathan began, his voice raw. "At the mansion. They shoved me back like I was a stranger. But I saw her, Miguel. Just for a second. She was at the window. Pale, thin. Not the way a child should look." Torres leaned back, folding his arms. "Jonathan, you know Victoria's lawyers. They'll bury anyone who crosses them." "I don't care about her lawyers," Jonathan snapped, the edge in his voice sharper than he intended. "I care about my daughter, and I've heard things, bruises, whispers from the staff. Something's happening in that house." Silence stretched. Torres studied him carefully, weighing truth against desperation. Then, before he could respond, a sharp bark split the air outside the office. Jonathan startled, turning toward the door. A moment later, a massive German shepherd padded in, his dark coat gleaming, amber eyes alert. The dog moved with the measured grace of a soldier, each step steady, muscles taut beneath his fur. He came straight to Torres's side, sitting with disciplined poise, though his gaze flickered curiously toward Jonathan. "Jonathan," Torres said, resting a hand on the dog's neck. "Meet Raven." The shepherd's ears perked at his name. His gaze was steady, intelligent, carrying the weight of experience. Jonathan had seen working dogs before, during his firefighting days. But there was something different about this one. Something in the quiet intensity of his stare, the way he seemed to assess the room, cataloging scents, sounds, even the emotions pulsing beneath the surface. "He's been with me 6 years, Torres explained. Bomb threats, missing persons, narcotics busts, you name it, He's been there. Saved my life twice. Jonathan leaned forward slightly, his hand trembling as he extended it. Mind if I? Torres nodded. Raven sniffed his hand, paused, then pressed his head firmly against Jonathan's palm. The gesture was both greeting and judgment, as if the dog had decided he was worthy enough to enter his circle of trust. Jonathan's throat tightened unexpectedly. He scratched behind Raven's ears, and the shepherd leaned in, a low rumble of approval in his chest. For a moment, the tension in Jonathan's body eased. You see? Torres said softly. He knows good men when he meets them. Jonathan swallowed hard. Does he also know when something's wrong? Torres tilted his head. What do you mean? Jonathan glanced at Raven, who was still watching him intently. When I said Sophia's name, his ears twitched. He looked at me like he understood. Torres's expression shifted. He reacts to emotion. It picks up on stress, fear, even things we can't sense. It's part of why he's the best partner I've ever had. Jonathan leaned closer, his voice low. Then listen to him. Because I'm telling you, something is wrong in that house. And if I'm the only one who believes it, then God help me. I'll fight this alone. Torres was quiet for a long moment. Raven broke the silence with a short huff, his gaze steady on Jonathan, as if confirming the truth of his words. Finally, Torres exhaled, rubbing his jaw. I'll look into it, quietly. But you need to be careful. Victoria's reach is long, and if she thinks you're stirring trouble, I don't care about me. Jonathan cut in, his voice breaking. I care about Sophia. She's all I have left. The words cracked something in the room. Torres reached across the desk, gripping Jonathan's shoulder. Then we'll find out the truth. For her. Raven shifted closer, placing one heavy paw against Jonathan's boot, as if sealing the pact in silence. Jonathan stared down at the dog's amber eyes, feeling the flicker of hope he thought had been extinguished. For the first time in months, he wasn't alone. He had an ally, a friend who wore a badge, and a dog whose instincts ran deeper than words. And together, they would follow the trail, no matter how dark it became. The night pressed heavy on the hill, moonlight barely piercing the veil of clouds drifting across the sky. The Hale mansion glimmered faintly beyond its iron gates, its windows lit like watchful eyes, staring down at the world below. For most, it was a place untouchable, a fortress where wealth silenced every rumor and power bent the truth into submission. But Jonathan Reed stood just outside those gates, cane in one hand, his other palm gripping the iron bars so tightly the metal bit into his skin. The cold night air stung his lungs, but it wasn't the chill that made him tremble. It was the desperation rising inside him, raw and unrelenting. He glanced once toward the guardhouse. Tonight, by some stroke of fortune, it was empty. Perhaps the men trusted that darkness itself was barrier enough. The silence gave him courage. He leaned closer to the bars, his breath fogging in the night. Sophia, he whispered. His voice cracked, as if even saying her name carried too much weight. He tried again, stronger this time. Sophia, it's Daddy. For a long moment, nothing stirred. The mansion loomed silent, distant, the windows unyielding in their glow. Jonathan's chest tightened with the familiar ache of disappointment. Perhaps she hadn't heard him. Perhaps she was asleep. Perhaps. Then, faint as the rustle of a leaf, a sound carried through the night. A small sob, muffled, yet unmistakable. Jonathan's heart seized. his head snapped upward, scanning the windows. There, on the third floor, a sliver of curtain shifted. Behind the glass, barely visible, was the faint silhouette of a child. Sophia, her tiny hand pressed against the glass as though reaching through it. The sob came again, fragile, torn from a throat too young to carry such sorrow. "Sweetheart," Jonathan whispered, his voice breaking. He pressed his forehead against the bars, straining as though he could climb through by will alone. "I'm here. Daddy's here." Beside him, Raven tensed. The German shepherd's ears shot forward, muscles coiling, a low growl rising deep in his chest. His amber eyes locked on the same window, and in an instant he lunged against the leash. The sudden force nearly yanked Jonathan off his feet. "Raven," Jonathan hissed, pulling back on the leash, but the dog refused to yield. His body surged toward the mansion, paws scraping at the gravel, his growls swelling into sharp, furious barks that shattered the quiet night. It was as though Raven could sense the fear seeping from that room, smell the salt of Sophia's tears carried on the wind. His every instinct screamed to break through, to tear down the walls that separated child from father. Jonathan struggled, his cane dropping to the ground as both hands fought to hold Raven back. His strength faltered, his injured leg buckled, and with a sharp cry, he collapsed to his knees against the gravel. The leash burned in his palms as Raven strained toward the mansion, barking so fiercely the sound echoed against the stone facade. Above, the curtain flickered. Sophia's sobs grew louder, though muffled by the glass. She pounded her small hand once, twice against the window pane, as though begging to be heard. Jonathan's soul tore in two. "I see you, baby girl," he cried, his voice ragged, carrying across the distance. "I hear you. I'm not going anywhere, do you understand? Daddy's not leaving you again." His words collapsed into the night, tangled with Raven's howls and the sound of a child's sobs carried down from the third floor. It was a chorus of anguish, of love, straining against walls too high, too cruel. Lights flickered on in the mansion. A shadow passed behind Sophia, and in a blink, the curtain dropped, cutting her from view. The sobs ceased, swallowed by silence. "No!" Jonathan screamed, scrambling against the gravel, his hands clawing at the iron bars. "Don't take her away from me! Don't you dare!" Raven barked again, sharp and furious, but the window remained dark. The fortress had reclaimed its prisoner. Jonathan slumped against the gate, his breath ragged, his chest heaving. His knees throbbed, his hands raw, but the pain was nothing compared to the hollow ache tearing through him. He pressed his forehead against the iron, closing his eyes as tears streamed freely down his face. For years he had fought fire, storm, and collapse without flinching, but nothing, not smoke, not flame, not the weight of falling walls, hurt like hearing his little girl cry for him and being powerless to reach her. Raven finally settled, though his body remained taut, pressed close to Jonathan's side. The dog gave a low whine, resting his head against Jonathan's shoulder. It was as if he, too, understood the futility of the night. Jonathan gripped the dog's fur, pulling him close, his tears dampening the shepherd's coat. "I swear to you, Sophia," he whispered hoarsely, voice trembling with resolve. "I will not abandon you, not again. I don't care what it takes, or who I have to fight. I'll bring you home." The night gave no answer, only the whisper of wind through the trees. Yet within Jonathan, something shifted. The anguish that had broken him also forged a vow, unyielding, unshakable. As he slowly rose, leaning heavily on Raven for support, he knew this was only the beginning. The mansion could shut its windows, the gates could stay locked, but the truth had spoken through a child's cry, and a father who has heard his daughter's tears cannot, will not, be silenced. The precinct had emptied for the night. Only the hum of vending machines and the faint buzz of fluorescent lights kept the silence from swallowing the halls whole. Miguel Torres leaned over his cluttered desk, his tie loosened, his fingers pinching the bridge of his nose. Reports lay scattered before him, but none of the words settled in his mind. His thoughts kept circling back to Jonathan's visit, to the desperation in his old friend's eyes. Beside his chair, Raven stirred. The German shepherd shifted restlessly, his claws clicking against the tile as he paced the office. Normally, after a long day, Raven collapsed into stillness, conserving his energy like a seasoned soldier. Tonight, however, his body was taut with unease, ears flicking at sounds Torres couldn't hear, eyes darting toward the door, as though something waited just beyond it. "What's gotten into you, partner?" Torres murmured, watching as Raven padded back and forth. The dog's chest rose and fell in quick bursts, nostrils flaring as if sniffing for something invisible. Torres leaned back, exhaustion dragging at his bones. "Jonathan's words got into your head too, didn't they?" The moment the name slipped from his mouth, Jonathan, nothing happened. But when he followed it with Sophia, Raven froze mid-step. His ears shot forward, his body stiffened, and a low, rumbling growl rolled out of his throat. Torres sat up straighter, startled. "Easy, boy." Raven ignored the command. He turned toward the window, muscles rippling, and let out a sharp bark that echoed through the empty precinct. His amber eyes gleamed in the fluorescent light, not wild, but focused, like a hunter catching the first whiff of prey. Torres's brows knit together. He tried again. Sophia. The same reaction. Raven's hackles lifted, his growl deepened, and his entire body strained as though pulling towards some unseen trail. Torres rose slowly from his chair. He had seen Raven react to the scent of drugs, to the faint trace of blood, to the subtle chemical tang of explosives. But this was different. This was not detection. This was agitation, instinct sharpened into something closer to pain. "Are you telling me he's right?" Torres whispered to himself. He thought of Jonathan's trembling voice, the way his friend had nearly broken at the gate. "That something's happening to her?" Raven barked again, pacing tight circles, his nails scraping against the tile. Then he came to Torres's side and nudged his leg hard, as if demanding action. Torres crouched, gripping the dog's collar, staring into those fiery eyes. "She's just a name to you, Raven. You've never met her. How can you know?" The shepherd whined low, pressing his head against Torres's chest, the weight of it grounding him in a way words never could. Torres felt it then, not just training, not just instinct, but something deeper. An animal's unexplainable intuition, a connection beyond logic. Raven wasn't reacting to sound alone. He was reacting to the weight behind the name, to the unspoken cries embedded in Jonathan's words. Torres exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "God help me," he muttered. He sat back down, resting his elbows on the desk. His rational side reminded him of the risks. Victoria Hale's influence, her lawyers who could dismantle careers with a single phone call, the higher-ups who already warned him to keep distance. To pursue this would be to jeopardize everything he'd built. But then, he glanced down at Raven. The dog was no longer pacing but sitting rigid, eyes still locked on the door, chest rumbling softly as though holding back a howl. Torres had worked alongside Raven long enough to trust his instincts in the field without question. If Raven stopped short of a warehouse, Torres knew danger waited inside. If Raven tugged toward a ravine, Torres knew someone was alive beneath the rubble. Time and again, Raven had proven that his senses reached beyond what humans could comprehend. And now, at the mention of Sophia, Raven's entire being screamed of threat, of harm, of something hidden. Torres rose, walking to the office window. Outside, the streets were empty, the city hushed. He thought of Jonathan, limping through those streets alone, clinging to hope with nothing but whispers to guide him. He thought of Sophia, a little girl trapped in a house too big, too silent, her tears muffled by curtains and walls. Behind him, Raven gave a short bark, as if urging him to decide. Torres turned back, his chest heavy. "All right, partner," he said quietly. "We'll dig, but we keep it careful. No mistakes." Raven's ears twitched, and for the first time that night, his body seemed to ease, though his eyes never lost their fire. He settled at Torres's feet, but the low hum of energy still rippled through him, a reminder that the storm had only just begun. Torres lowered into his chair once more, staring at the stack of reports on his desk. He pushed them aside and pulled out a fresh notepad. At the top he wrote a single name, Sophia Reed. The ink bled slowly into the paper, stark against the white, a fragile mark that could cost him everything. But Torres felt a shift inside, the kind that comes when duty bends to something greater than rules. Raven rested his head against Torres's boot, eyes half closed yet alert. The dog let out a sigh, deep and steady, as though satisfied that his message had been heard. In the silence that followed, Torres whispered to himself, almost as a prayer, "If your instincts are right, boy, then God help her, and God help us for what comes next." The precinct lights flickered, the clock ticked past midnight, and the air grew heavy with the weight of choices not yet made. Somewhere in the mansion on the hill, a child shifted restlessly in her sleep, as though sensing that her name had traveled into the night, that a dog's growl and a father's grief had carried her truth beyond locked doors. And for the first time, Miguel Torres felt the faint, unshakable certainty that Jonathan Reed was not chasing shadows. He was chasing pain. Real, undeniable pain. The road to the Hale estate wound like a scar through the hillside, lined with oaks that bent in the night wind. Their branches whispered overhead, long shadows crossing the pavement like reaching fingers. Jonathan Reed sat in the passenger seat of Torres's unmarked sedan, his scarred hands clenched tight against his knees. He had insisted on coming, even when Torres warned him that this was just reconnaissance. "No stunts," Torres said for the third time as he eased the car onto the gravel shoulder. "We're just looking." Jonathan nodded, though his eyes stayed fixed on the mansion that loomed ahead. In daylight, its glass walls gleamed like jewels, but at night it was something else entirely. A dark shape against the horizon, its windows glowing faintly like watchtowers. The gates at the base of the drive were closed, flanked by stone pillars carved with Hale's family crest. Beyond them, the mansion's silhouette rose, too still, too perfect, as if holding its breath. Raven sat in the back seat, ears high, amber eyes locked on the distant gates. His body quivered with tension, and when Torres slowed the car, the dog let out a low growl that vibrated through the quiet interior. "You hear that?" Jonathan whispered. Torres nodded grimly. "He doesn't like it." Jonathan turned in his seat, watching Raven. The shepherd's gaze never left the mansion. His chest rumbled, claws scraping against the upholstery as though he wanted out, wanted closer. Each time Torres rolled the car a few feet forward, Raven pressed harder against the window, growling deeper. "Easy, partner," Torres murmured, his hand tightening on the wheel. "We're not going in." But Raven's body said otherwise. His nose pressed hard against the glass, fogging it with breath, and then, with sudden ferocity, he let out a bark that cut sharp through the night. Jonathan flinched. "What's he doing?" Jonathan asked, though he already knew. "He's picking up something," Torres said, his voice low, unsettled. "Something he doesn't like." Jonathan stared back at the mansion, his heart pounding. Every instinct told him that Sophia was in there, awake, frightened. He could almost hear her faint sobs from that night by the gates, echoing through his mind. He gripped the dash so hard his knuckles turned white. "Pull closer," Jonathan urged. Torres hesitated. "You know we can't trespass." "Then just close enough for him to do whatever it is he does." The sedan rolled another few yards forward, crunching gravel under its tires. Raven erupted into a frenzy. He clawed at the window, growling so fiercely his whole body shook. His tail was stiff, ears pinned forward, every line of his frame screaming alert. Jonathan's throat closed. He leaned closer to the glass, staring at the gates, as if sheer willpower might pierce the walls. "She's in there," he whispered. "She has to be." Raven suddenly lunged against the door, pawing at the ground when Torres cracked it open. The shepherd dropped onto the gravel, nose to the earth, pacing in tight circles, whining, then scratching violently at the dirt, as though digging for something hidden beneath the surface. Jonathan stumbled out of the car, his limp slowing him, but not stopping him. He crouched beside Raven, running a trembling hand over the dog's back. "What is it, boy? What do you smell?" Raven barked once, sharp and urgent, then clawed at the earth again, sending gravel flying. His growl deepened, vibrating through Jonathan's hand. Torres stood nearby, his face a mask of unease. "He never acts like this unless—" He stopped himself, but Jonathan caught the words hanging unsaid. "Unless there's danger. Unless someone's in pain." The night grew heavier around them, the wind rising, rustling through the trees like whispers of warning. From the mansion's high windows, lights flickered faintly, shifting shadows across the walls. Jonathan's stomach churned. He felt it too, the sense of wrongness, of something festering behind those gates. Torres exhaled slowly, his eyes on Raven. "He's telling us she's there, or at least, that something is." Jonathan's hands shook. "Then why are we still standing here?" His voice cracked with fury, with grief. "Why aren't we breaking that damn door down and pulling her out?" "Because without proof, they'll bury us before we even start," Torres said, his voice heavy. "We'd lose everything, and she'd be worse off for it." Jonathan sagged against the car, his chest heaving. The thought of walking away felt like betrayal, but the truth in Torres's words bit deep. He closed his eyes, hearing again Sophia's muffled sobs, feeling the sting of her absence like an open wound. Beside him, Raven barked again, spinning once before planting himself at the gate, body rigid. He stared upward at the mansion, his growl unrelenting, as if calling out an unseen enemy. His presence was a living indictment, proof that something inside those walls was not as it seemed. Jonathan crouched beside the dog, gripping his collar, his forehead resting against Raven's fur. "Hold on, Soph," he whispered into the night, voice trembling. "I'm coming for you. I swear it." The words carried into the dark, swallowed by the silence of the hill. But somewhere behind those gleaming windows, Jonathan imagined his daughter shifting in her bed, feeling the echo of her father's vow, an echo carried not only by blood, but by the fierce, unyielding bark of a dog who would not be silenced. Torres laid a hand on Jonathan's shoulder, grounding him. "We'll find a way, but not tonight. Tonight, we take the warning for what it is." Jonathan lifted his gaze to the mansion one last time. It stood unshaken, but he saw it differently now, not as an untouchable fortress, but as a place already cracking, already trembling under the weight of truth. As they pulled away, Raven refused to sit back. He stayed pressed against the window, eyes locked on the mansion until the last trace of it vanished from sight. And Jonathan knew, with bone-deep certainty, that the shepherd's growl was not a warning of danger to come. It was a confirmation. Danger was already there. The banquet hall shimmered with opulence. Golden chandeliers spilled warm light over silk-covered tables, each adorned with crystal vases of imported lilies. A string quartet played softly in the corner, their bows gliding in unison, while waiters in white jackets circled the room with trays of champagne and caviar. The air was thick with perfume, laughter, and the rustle of gowns worth more than a working man's year of wages. At the center of it all, Victoria Hale glided like royalty. Her gown was silver this time, sequined so heavily that each turn of her body caught the light and sent it scattering across the room. She leaned in to embrace a senator's wife, shook hands with a bank president, and pressed her cheek against a celebrity's for the cameras. Every movement was rehearsed, perfect. To the assembled elite, she was not a woman, but a symbol: wealth, power, beauty, and control made flesh. Her smile was flawless, but her eyes remained untouched by it, cold and calculating. Jonathan Reed stood in the shadows outside, across the street where the halo of lamplight dissolved into darkness. He had no invitation, no fine clothes, only the worn jacket on his back and the stubborn fire in his chest. Torres had warned him to keep his distance, but Jonathan couldn't, not when his daughter was inside those walls. Beside him, Raven crouched low, his dark coat blending with the night. The shepherd's amber eyes never left the mansion's third floor, where a wide bay window overlooked the festivities. His body was rigid, every muscle taut, ears pitched forward. Jonathan's gaze followed Raven's, and then he saw it. Behind the glass, high above the shimmering gowns and polished laughter, a small figure stood, Sophia. Her face was pale, pressed close to the pane, her small hands resting against the glass, as though she were peering into another world she could never touch. Her eyes did not move, fixed blankly on the night beyond the glowing hall. There was no sparkle, no smile, only emptiness, as if the light of the gala below had drained her of her own. Jonathan's heart clenched so hard, he thought it might stop. "Sweetheart." The word slipped from his lips like a prayer, though he knew she couldn't hear him. Raven gave a low, guttural growl, deep in his chest. Jonathan felt it vibrate through the leash in his hand, through the ground itself. The shepherd's hackles bristled, his body leaning forward, every instinct pulling toward the mansion, as though he could break through walls of stone and glass to reach the child. "Easy, boy," Jonathan whispered, though his own voice trembled. His hand tightened on the leash, not to restrain Raven, but to steady himself. Inside the hall, Victoria raised her glass. A hush fell over the guests, every eye fixed on her. She delivered her speech with practiced grace, words about charity, about hope, about giving back to the community. The crowd responded with applause, cameras flashing, her image preserved again and again in perfect frames. To them, She was an angel of mercy. To Jonathan, she was the jailer of his daughter. He looked back at Sophia's window. The girl hadn't moved. She stood like a ghost, staring through the glass into the night, her face devoid of expression, as though she had long since learned that no one was coming for her. Jonathan pressed a hand to his chest, trying to keep himself from breaking apart. He remembered her laughter once, bright, uncontained, the way she used to race across the yard to leap into his arms. He remembered her clinging to his neck, whispering, "Don't let go, Daddy." And now she stood behind glass, silent and pale, her joy stripped away. Raven's growl deepened. The dog pawed at the ground, muscles bunching like coiled steel. His eyes never wavered from Sophia's silhouette. Jonathan knelt beside him, gripping his fur. "I see her too, boy," he whispered, tears pricking his eyes. "I see her." The shepherd whined, a sound so low and mournful it cut deeper than any bark. It was as if Raven himself carried the child's fear in his chest, felt it radiating through the night, and could not bear it. Jonathan wiped a shaking hand over his face, forcing himself to look away from the window. He turned his gaze toward Victoria, standing in her glory, basking in applause. The contrast between mother and daughter seared into him, the mother glowing beneath chandeliers, the daughter fading behind glass. The cameras flashed again. Victoria's cold smile gleamed brighter than the diamonds at her throat. "Mask," Jonathan muttered under his breath. "It's all just a mask." He straightened slowly, his leg protesting, but his resolve unbroken. "Hold on, Soph," he whispered, his voice trembling with both pain and promise. "I'll tear that mask away. I swear it." Beside him, Raven gave one final growl, then went still, his body pressed against Jonathan's side, his heartbeat a steady drum. Together, man and dog stood in the shadows, staring up at the gilded world they were barred from. And though the gala continued, though Victoria Hale basked in applause and cameras, Jonathan knew the truth had already cracked her perfect world. For in that upstairs window, the silent cry of a child had reached him, and Raven's growl had confirmed what his heart already knew. The mask would not hold forever. The night was damp, the air heavy with the smell of rain-soaked earth and the faint tang of iron from the wrought iron gates of the Hale estate. Jonathan Reed moved slowly along the narrow alley that ran behind the manicured grounds, his limp more pronounced from fatigue. Torres had insisted this was reckless, but Jonathan couldn't sit idly anymore. He needed something tangible, something more than whispers and fleeting glimpses of his daughter's pale face behind glass. Beside him, Raven padded silently, his body low, ears pitched forward. The German shepherd had been restless all evening, his energy wired tight like a bowstring. Every few steps, he lifted his nose, sniffing the air, pausing as though catching fragments of a trail invisible to human senses. "Easy, boy," Jonathan whispered, though his own chest thundered with urgency. The alley ended at a row of dumpsters, their metal sides slick with rain. Most overflowed with the ordinary excess of wealth. Discarded floral arrangements, catering boxes, shredded papers. Jonathan's stomach churned at the thought of how easily fortunes were wasted here, while his daughter starved for love inside. Then Raven froze. His entire body stiffened, tail straight, nose lifted. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Jonathan felt his pulse quicken. "What is it?" The shepherd lunged toward the largest dumpster, claws scraping against wet pavement. He leapt up, paws braced against the rusted edge, nose burying into the mound of black bags. His growl turned sharp, urgent. Jonathan's throat tightened. He dragged a nearby crate under the lip of the dumpster and hoisted himself up, ignoring the fire in his injured leg. With Raven beside him, he reached in and pulled free one of the bags the dog had fixated on. The plastic sagged, leaking a faint smell that twisted Jonathan's stomach. His fingers trembled as he tore it open. Inside, beneath crumpled napkins and food scraps, lay a small child's dress, pale pink once, now smeared with dirt and rain. The hem was frayed, a button missing, and across the bodice, faint but undeniable, were stains the color of rusted earth. Blood. Jonathan staggered back as though struck. The dress slipped from his hands, falling into the puddled ground. He caught himself against the dumpster, breath ragged, vision swimming. No. His voice cracked, broken. God, no. He dropped to his knees in the rain, his palms sinking into the mud as he reached for the dress again. He lifted it gingerly, as though it might dissolve at his touch. The fabric clung to his fingers, cold and damp, the stains darker now that the water spread them. It was small, far too small for anyone but a child Sophia's age. Jonathan pressed the dress to his chest, his tears mixing with the rain. Sophia, he whispered, his body shaking. The image of his daughter's bruised arms, her blank stare at the window, now merged with this horrifying proof. The whispers, the cries, the growls. They had all been leading here. Raven stood close, his body rigid, his growl steady and low as he circled the dumpster, nose working furiously. He barked once, sharp and commanding, as if telling Jonathan, "This is real. You can't look away now." Jonathan clutched the dress tighter, his heart tearing. "What did they do to you, baby girl?" His knees gave out, and he slumped against the wall of the alley, sliding down until he sat in the mud. The weight of the dress pressed on him like a stone, every fiber screaming of pain his daughter should never have known. The world blurred, rain streaking through the glow of distant streetlights, the alley shrinking until all he could see was the fragile piece of fabric in his arms. Memories assaulted him. Sophia twirling in a sundress on a summer morning, spinning until she fell laughing into the grass. Sophia tugging at his sleeve, begging him to lift her so she could fly. Those memories clashed violently with the stained dress, and Jonathan felt his heart shatter all over again. He buried his face in the fabric. "I should have protected you. I should have fought harder." Torres's words from earlier echoed in his mind. "Without proof, they'll bury us." Now he had proof, but it was the kind that seared the soul. Proof that came too late to shield her from hurt. Raven pressed his body against Jonathan's side, the weight of him grounding, steady. The shepherd nudged the dress with his nose, then whined, his amber eyes reflecting sorrow and fury alike. Jonathan wrapped one arm around the dog's neck, clinging to him as though the animal's strength alone might keep him from drowning in despair. The alley was silent but for Jonathan's ragged sobs and the steady rain tapping against metal. Somewhere beyond the walls, laughter from the gala still floated faintly into the night, obscene in its brightness. Inside, Victoria Hale smiled for cameras, draped in jewels, and here, in the shadows behind her empire, lay the discarded evidence of a child's suffering. Jonathan's tears hardened into something else, resolve forged in agony. He lifted the dress, his hands trembling but sure. "This ends tonight," he whispered through clenched teeth. "She won't suffer alone anymore. I swear it." Raven barked once, sharp and fierce, as if sealing the vow. His body leaned forward, ready, his growl vibrating through the rain. Jonathan staggered to his feet, mud clinging to his jeans, his chest still heaving. He folded the dress carefully, as though it were sacred, and tucked it inside his jacket. Proof. Painful, damning proof. As he limped away from the alley, Raven pressed close at his side, their steps falling in rhythm. Together they left behind the overflowing dumpsters, but the memory of that small pink dress would follow Jonathan into every waking moment, and with it came a father's rage that no gate, no guard, no mask of wealth could ever silence. Jonathan Reed waited in the shadows of the small cafe on Elm Street, a place that smelled of burnt coffee and lemon-scented cleaner. The hour was late, the booths nearly empty, the hum of an old refrigerator filling the silence between clinks of dishes from the kitchen. He sat in the corner, his jacket heavy against his chest where the pink dress lay hidden, its weight pressing like a stone against his heart. Raven lay under the table at his feet, his head resting on his paws, amber eyes never closing fully. Even here, even now, the shepherd's body stayed alert, every muscle ready. Jonathan reached down absently, his fingers brushing through the dog's fur. The simple contact kept him anchored. The bell above the cafe door chimed softly. Jonathan lifted his head. A woman entered, small-framed, shoulders stooped beneath the weight of years. Her uniform still bore the faint scent of bleach, and her hands were rough, cracked from scrubbing. She looked around nervously, her eyes darting to every corner before settling on him. Jonathan recognized her instantly. Mrs. Alvarez, the cleaning woman from the Hale mansion. She hesitated at the door, glancing once over her shoulder as though she expected to be followed. Then, clutching her worn handbag tight to her chest, she crossed the cafe and slid into the booth across from him. "Thank you for coming," Jonathan said, his voice low, roughened by exhaustion. Her eyes glistened. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered, her accent soft, but her words trembling. "If they find out..." Jonathan leaned forward, his scarred hands clasped tightly on the table. "Please, I just need to know, is my daughter safe?" Mrs. Alvarez swallowed hard. Her fingers fumbled with the clasp of her handbag. She glanced again toward the window, toward the empty street beyond, then leaned in close. From inside the bag, she pulled a folded piece of paper. Her hands shook as she slid it across the table. Jonathan hesitated before unfolding it. When he did, the air left his lungs. It was a photograph, blurred as though taken in haste. The lighting was dim, the angle crooked, but the subject was unmistakable. Sophia. His little girl sat on the edge of a bed, her hair hanging in tangled strands around her face. Her arms were wrapped around a stuffed bear, missing one eye, and along her right arm, visible even in the poor quality of the image, was a dark bruise. Jonathan's hand trembled as he traced the outline of the bruise on the paper, his throat tightening until he could barely breathe. The cafe blurred around him. All he could see was the hollow look in Sophia's eyes, the way her shoulders curved inward, as though she were trying to make herself smaller. His voice cracked. "When was this taken?" Mrs. Alvarez looked down, shame filling her gaze. 2 weeks ago. I was cleaning the hall. She left her door open for just a moment. I saw her sitting there and..." Her voice faltered. "I couldn't pretend anymore." Jonathan gripped the photo tighter, his knuckles white. Rage and grief clashed inside him, leaving his body trembling. Why hasn't anyone said anything? Why hasn't anyone stopped this? Tears welled in the woman's eyes. Because she is Victoria Hale. People don't cross her. Not the police, not the courts, not anyone. If you speak against her, you lose your job, your home. I have children too, Senor Reed. But when I saw your little girl..." She shook her head, pressing a hand to her chest. "I can't keep silent anymore." Raven stirred beneath the table, sensing Jonathan's trembling. He shifted closer, pressing his body against Jonathan's legs, a grounding presence in the storm. Jonathan reached down, burying his hand in the shepherd's fur, clutching it like a lifeline. He looked back at the photograph. Sophia's small, bruised arm seemed to burn into his vision. This was more than whispers, more than instinct. This was proof. Proof of pain, of neglect, of cruelty hidden behind the mansion's walls. Jonathan's voice shook. "Thank you. You don't know what this means to me." Mrs. Alvarez shook her head. "I'm not brave. I should have done this sooner, but you must be careful. If she finds out, she will destroy you." Jonathan folded the photo carefully, slipping it into his jacket beside the stained dress. The weight of both pressed against him, each piece a shard of truth, sharp enough to cut through the walls of denial. He met the woman's eyes. "You're braver than you think. You've given me something no one else would. And I promise you, I'll use it." Her lips trembled, but she nodded. Then, glancing once more around the cafe, she rose quickly, clutching her handbag to her chest. Without another word, she slipped out into the night, the bell above the door chiming softly in her wake. Jonathan sat frozen, staring at the empty booth she left behind. His hands shook as he pulled the photograph from his pocket again, holding it in the light. Raven lifted his head, eyes following the image, as if the shepherd too understood the truth it carried. Jonathan whispered, his voice breaking, "I'll get you out, Soph. I swear on my life, I'll get you out." Raven gave a low whine, pressing his head into Jonathan's knee, sealing the vow with silent solidarity. The cafe around them returned to its quiet rhythm, dishes clattering, the hum of the refrigerator, the muted chatter of the waitress with the cook. But for Jonathan, everything had changed. He no longer carried just suspicion. He carried evidence, painful, undeniable evidence. And though the mansion still loomed untouchable, Jonathan felt the first crack in its walls. The mask was slipping. The precinct meeting room was a windowless square, its walls lined with filing cabinets and faded photographs of officers long retired. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, washing everything in a pale, clinical glow. On the table lay 2 items, a small pink dress sealed in an evidence bag and a blurred photograph of Sophia, her small arm marked with a dark bruise. Jonathan sat at the far end of the table, his cane propped against the wall, his body taut with impatience. He had barely slept in days, his mind consumed by those 2 artifacts. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw the dress in Sophia's closet, once worn with joy, now discarded like trash. He saw her hollow eyes staring into nothing, and he heard her cry. Miguel Torres entered with a stack of files under one arm. His expression was grim, but his eyes held a glimmer of determination. Raven padded behind him, nails tapping lightly against the linoleum. The shepherd's body always alert, always aware. "All right," Torres said, dropping the files onto the table. "I've submitted the evidence up the chain. The bruises, the dress. This should be enough to warrant at least a welfare check. Maybe more." Jonathan exhaled sharply, gripping the edge of the table. "Then let's do it. Let's bring her out of there tonight." Torres shook his head. "It doesn't move that fast. There's protocol, paperwork, hearings, but I thought—" The door opened before he could finish. 2 men stepped inside, their suits immaculate, their leather briefcases gleaming. They moved with the confidence of men who had never known the weight of defeat. Behind them came a woman, tall and composed, her heels clicking against the floor like the steady beat of a gavel. "Gentlemen," she said smoothly, placing her briefcase on the table, "I represent Mrs. Victoria Hale." Jonathan's chest tightened. He recognized her face from news reports. Amelia Grant, the attorney who had dismantled Fortune 500 companies in court and walked away without a scratch. She had the kind of reputation that made even judges tread lightly. Torres bristled. This is a police matter. You don't belong in this room. Grant smiled, sharp as glass. When it concerns the reputation of my client, I belong everywhere. She opened her briefcase with deliberate calm, withdrawing a folder thick with documents. Let's not waste time. I've been informed you are in possession of items you claim suggest neglect. My client categorically denies these accusations. Jonathan slammed his fist against the table, rattling the evidence bag. That's her dress. Those stains are blood. And this photo. Look at her arm. Look at it. Grant didn't even flinch. She slid the folder forward. What I see are allegations built on circumstantial evidence and hearsay. You think a court will entertain this? You think the public will believe a disgraced firefighter with a record of instability over a woman who donates millions to children's hospitals? Jonathan's face burned with fury. Instability. My only crime is wanting to save my daughter. Careful, Mr. Reed, she said softly, almost pitying. Words like that sound unhinged, and unhinged fathers don't win custody battles. They lose rights altogether. Torres rose, his chair scraping back. This is intimidation. That dress and that photograph are legitimate evidence. Grant's smile widened. Evidence that will be dismissed when our experts testify those stains are rust, not blood, that the photograph was doctored or taken out of context. And when we present the custody agreement signed by the court, which clearly grants full guardianship to my client, your entire case will collapse. Jonathan's throat tightened. You can't erase the truth. Truth, Grant said, her voice like a blade wrapped in silk, is what the court says it is, and in this town, Mrs. Hale's truth carries more weight than yours. Silence pressed heavy against the room. Raven growled low, the sound filling the air like distant thunder. His amber eyes locked on Grant, his body tense. She glanced down at him briefly, her composure unbroken. Control your dog, Officer Torres. Torres stepped forward, his jaw clenched. You're not going to scare us off this. Not me, not him, not that dog. Grant gathered her documents calmly, sliding them back into her briefcase. This is not a threat. It's reality. Drop this matter now, or you will both face consequences far worse than disappointment. She snapped the case shut. Good evening, gentlemen. The three of them left as swiftly as they had come, the echo of their footsteps lingering in the hallway. The silence that followed was suffocating. Jonathan's hands shook as he gripped the photograph, staring at Sophia's blurred figure until his vision swam. They can't do this, he whispered. They can't just bury her suffering because of money. Torres lowered back into his chair, his face grave. They can. They will. That's the wall we're up against. Jonathan pressed the photo to his chest, his shoulders shaking. Then I'll tear it down with my bare hands if I have to. She's my little girl, Miguel. They can warn me, threaten me, strip me of everything I have left, but they won't stop me. Raven stepped closer, pressing his head into Jonathan's arm, the warmth of his body a silent vow. Torres leaned forward, his voice steady despite the storm in his eyes. Then we fight smart. We find more. We don't stop until we've got so much they can't silence us. But you need to understand, Jonathan. This is war, and wars cost. Jonathan lifted his gaze, his eyes hollow but burning. Then let them come. Because I've already lost too much to turn back now. The dress and the photograph lay between them, fragile against the vast machinery of power aligned against them. Yet, in that small room, in the growl of a loyal dog and the broken whisper of a father, there was still resistance, and resistance was enough to begin. The cabin was quiet, except for the steady pop of wood in the stove. Shadows stretched across the walls, flickering with the rhythm of the flames. Jonathan Reed sat hunched forward in his worn armchair, his scarred hands clasped so tightly the knuckles blanched. The evidence he carried, the pink dress, the blurred photograph, was sealed in a drawer, but its weight pressed on him like a stone. At his feet lay Raven, a German shepherd whose amber eyes never rested. The dog's steady presence was the only thing keeping Jonathan anchored to the present. But memories rose unbidden, dragging him back into fire. The smoke is thick as midnight, the roar of collapsing beams, the sting of heat tearing into his skin. He remembered the weight of the gear, the rasp of the oxygen mask, the adrenaline that drove him through flames no human body was meant to endure. And he remembered the night that ended his career, the Alder Street duplex, 2 children trapped inside. He had carried them both out alive before a beam came crashing down, shattering his leg and branding his body with scars. His career as a firefighter had ended there, but their lives had been worth the cost. Jonathan's breath hitched as he whispered into the cabin, "I saved them, but I can't save my own little girl." The words ripped through him. He had pulled strangers' children from fire, yet Sophia, his Sophia, was locked away behind the gates of Victoria Hale's mansion, bruised and broken, crying for him, and he stood powerless outside. Raven rose and pressed his head into Jonathan's lap, warm and grounding. Jonathan's hands trembled as he stroked the shepherd's fur. "You'd have run through the fire too, wouldn't you? Without thinking." Raven's tail flicked once, silent affirmation. The fire popped loudly, and Jonathan's gaze blurred until the stove became an inferno. Sophia's laughter rushed into his mind, her giggles when he swung her into the air, her small voice whispering, "Don't let go, Daddy." Now those same eyes were hollow, her arms marked by bruises. Jonathan slammed his fist against the armrest. "No more. I won't fail her again." He bent forward, voice raw. "If I could crawl back into the flames, if I could carry her out the way I carried those children, I would. God help me, I would." Silence followed, heavy as smoke, but slowly guilt hardened into resolve. Jonathan pulled the photograph from the drawer, staring at Sophia's bruised arm. His voice steadied. "This is my fire now, and I'll walk through it, no matter the cost." Raven pressed closer, his breath warm on Jonathan's hand, as though sealing the vow. Jonathan knew he couldn't fight alone, and one by one, allies appeared. The first came from the courthouse steps. Judge Harold Benton, long retired, sat feeding pigeons when Jonathan approached. Benton didn't need an explanation. "You think you're the first father to stand at those gates, begging for his child?" His voice carried the weight of verdicts past. "Victoria Hale owns the silence of this town. No judge signs a warrant without proof that cannot be buried." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "Then I'll find proof strong enough to burn through her empire." Benton studied him, then handed over a yellowed card. "When you have it, bring it to me. I still know which doors to knock on." The second ally waited in the dim light of a church. Father Gabriel, his hair white as snow, listened quietly as Jonathan confessed his torment. "She's hurting my daughter," Jonathan said. "Everyone tells me to stay quiet." The priest's eyes shone with sorrow. "That is how she rules, through silence. But silence is cracking. I cannot break a confession, but I can tell you this. I've heard too many stories of children in that house. Bruises explained away. Servants dismissed. Secrets swallowed." Jonathan gripped the pew, voice low. "Then I will not be silent. Not anymore. Father Gabriel rested a calloused hand over Jonathan's. Then you will not fight alone. This church is old, but its doors will be a sanctuary when the storm comes. The third ally came in a diner booth through ink and paper. Amelia Torres had once been a national journalist. Now she wrote for the town's small paper, her career broken by powerful enemies. She tapped the photograph with her fingernail, her eyes sharp. Do you know how many tips I've had about that house? Dozens. Every time I write, the story gets spiked. But I've already lost everything once. I'll print what no one else dares, if you bring me the proof. Jonathan leaned closer. You'd risk it all again? Her smile was bitter but fierce. What's left to lose? That night, Jonathan returned to the cabin with 3 names. Benton, Gabriel, Torres. A retired judge, an old priest, a weary journalist. Fragile threads of hope against an empire of fear. He spread their cards and notes across the table, the photograph of Sophia in the center. Raven shifted, eyes fixed on him, sensing the storm in his heart. Jonathan dropped to his knees before the shepherd, clutching his thick collar with scarred hands. I've lost my career, my marriage, my place in this world, but I will not lose her. Help me save her, Raven. Help me bring Sophia home. The dog leaned forward, licking Jonathan's hand. Tears broke from him as he pressed his forehead against Raven's. That's a promise then, a pact between us. Raven whined softly, tail thumping once, sealing the vow. Jonathan rose slowly, pain flaring in his leg, but his shoulders straight, his resolve unshaken. He gathered the evidence into a folder, slid it into his bag, and rested a steady hand on Raven's head. We'll do this together, you and me. The stove hissed as a log collapsed into embers. Outside, thunder rolled over the pines. But inside the cabin, a father and a dog stood united, bound not by chance, but by choice. Jonathan whispered one last time, voice hoarse but steady. Hold on, Sophia. Daddy's coming. And this time, I'll never let go. Raven pressed against his side, amber eyes unwavering. In that dim cabin, surrounded by shadows and scraps of evidence, the pact was sealed. Not in law, not in ink, but in the unspoken loyalty of a man and a dog who would not stop until the child they loved was free. The night pressed heavy, clouds masking the moon. Miguel Torres cut the headlights as the unmarked sedan rolled into the trees. Ahead, Victoria Hale's mansion glowed against the horizon, stone, glass, and power wrapped in floodlights. Jonathan Reed sat rigid in the passenger seat, the folder of evidence tucked under his seat. Tonight was not about old scraps. Tonight was about proof, the kind even Hale's army of lawyers couldn't bury. You're sure? Torres asked, pulling a duffel into his lap. Inside, small motion-triggered cameras gleamed. Jonathan's jaw tightened. I'm sure. Every day we wait, she suffers. Between them, Raven shifted, nose pressed against the glass, eyes burning at the distant house. They moved through the wet grass, Torres slipping Jonathan a camera the size of a deck of cards. Raven led the way, weaving low through shadows. At an oak leaning toward the mansion wall, the shepherd scratched the roots and froze, ears pitched forward. Perfect sightline, Torres whispered. Jonathan set the first camera, the red light blinking once before disappearing. Further along, Raven pawed the mortar of a retaining wall. Jonathan crouched, fingertips brushing something damp and metallic. Blood. She's been here, he breathed. Torres's face hardened. Or someone has. They planted the second camera, hidden beneath vines. At the hedges near the service road, Raven nosed out a scrap of faded blue fabric. frayed as if torn away in struggle. Jonathan's chest twisted. It looked like Sophia's dress. "She's leaving signs," he murmured, crying out the only way she can. By the time the third camera was hidden, Jonathan's legs screamed with pain, but his chest burned with something fiercer. Resolve. Back at the car, Torres's laptop flickered to life, showing 3 silent feeds. Manicured grounds, empty paths. Jonathan leaned back, whispering, "For the first time, I feel like we're watching her back." Torres warned him softly. "What we find might not be easy to stomach." Hours later, in Jonathan's cabin, rain tapped against the windows. The laptop glowed across the table. Jonathan leaned in, eyes burning with fatigue. Raven pressed close at his feet. Then Torres froze. "Jonathan, look." On the top left feed, a third-floor window lit dimly. A small figure pressed against the glass. Jonathan's breath caught. Sophia. Her thin frame hunched, her hair limp, hands clutching a broken doll against her chest. She set it on the sill and turned to the bars, iron, thick as prison rods. Then, her small hand began to tap. Tap, pause, tap, tap, pause, tap. Jonathan's chest seized. "It's a signal. It's SOS." Torres leaned close. "That's no accident." Sophia repeated it, steady despite the tremor in her frame. Behind her hollow eyes was urgency, pleading. Jonathan's tears fell unchecked. "She's alive. She's fighting to reach us." Raven surged to his feet, nose against the laptop, growling low. Jonathan gripped the shepherd's collar. "I hear you, Soph. Daddy's here." For a long moment, Sophia stayed by the bars, pressing the doll's face to them in a gesture almost like a wave. Jonathan's heart shattered. "She knows we're out here," he whispered. Torres's jaw tightened. "This is the proof. A child doesn't invent SOS." Sophia tapped once more before vanishing into the curtains, the feed settling back into stillness. Jonathan sat trembling, but his voice was steady now. "She's calling us, and we're going to answer." Whispers spread. The photograph, the dress, the priest's troubled sermon, they all chipped at Hale's empire. For the first time, Victoria Hale felt the ground shift, and she did not tolerate shifts. Guards multiplied overnight. Spotlights swept like blades across the mansion's lawns. Servants were forced into tighter routines. Gardeners ordered to carry ID badges. From the hillside, Jonathan and Torres watched. Raven crouched low beside them. "She knows," Torres muttered. "She's tightening the noose." Jonathan clenched his fists. "That means we're close." But Hale's power reached further than gates, and soon it struck back. Judge Benton met Jonathan at dusk, his steps slow, his cane heavy. "They forced me out," he whispered, anger trembling in his voice. "My consultancy is gone. My pension is threatened. All because I spoke to you." Jonathan's stomach twisted. "I never meant—" The old man gripped his shoulder. "Don't apologize. I knew what it would cost. But understand this. She's coming for anyone who helps you, and she won't stop until you're alone again." The warning hollowed Jonathan's chest. He thought of Father Gabriel, of Emilia Torres. They too were now in her crosshairs. At the church, anonymous threats appeared. "Your flock will suffer if you keep speaking out." At the paper, Emilia's editor reassigned her to obituaries and real estate, her drafts deleted without explanation. "Orders from upstairs," he muttered. Meanwhile, Hale smiled at Galus, shook hands with senators, and wrote checks that bought silence. To the world, she was grace itself. In truth, her claws tore deeper than ever. In the cabin, Jonathan paced like a caged animal, his limp pronounced but fury driving him past the pain. She's stripping away everyone we have, one by one. His fist slammed the table, Sophia's photograph sliding across, her bruised arm staring up at him. Torres's voice was grim. That's the strategy. Isolate you. Make you look desperate. That way, when you finally scream the truth, no one listens. Jonathan's throat burned. She can take everything from me, but I won't let her take Sophia. Raven rose, pressing against his side, growl low, eyes fierce. Jonathan dropped to his knees, clutching the shepherd's fur. His tears fell hot into Raven's coat. They can silence judges, priests, journalists, but they can't buy you, can they, boy? Raven licked his scarred cheek, sealing the vow. Torres stepped closer. Then we push harder. Every attempt she makes to bury this becomes part of the evidence. Fear leaves trails, Jonathan, and sooner or later, even Victoria Hale won't be able to hide hers. Jonathan wiped his face, rising heavy but unbroken. His body bore scars. His limp slowed him, but his eyes burned with fire. Let her unleash everything she has. I'll take it all and still keep fighting for her. His hand rested on Raven's collar. The shepherd leaned into his touch, steady and unflinching. And in that moment, despite the walls closing in, Jonathan knew the truth. Victoria Hale's empire was powerful, ruthless, vast. But a father's resolve, once forged in love and loss, was fire. And fire, once lit, could never be silenced. The Grand Oak Hotel gleamed with wealth. Crystal chandeliers spilled golden light across velvet drapes, polished marble, and the swirl of silk gowns. Donors laughed over champagne while a string quartet played softly in the corner. It was one of Victoria Hale's galas, her empire's crown jewel covered in the papers, attended by senators, judges, and moguls. The banners read, "For the children." Jonathan Reed, standing in the shadows at the back of the hall, felt bile rise in his throat. Raven pressed close to his leg, eyes locked on the stage. Miguel Torres stood at his side, silent. The crowd hushed when Victoria appeared. Draped in emerald silk, diamonds at her throat, she looked every inch the benevolent queen. Cameras flashed as she lifted a hand, her smile practiced perfection. "Tonight," she purred, "we come together for the children, because every child deserves safety, opportunity, and love." Applause erupted. Jonathan clenched his fists. Then Victoria beckoned, and the hall stilled as Sophia stepped into the light. Jonathan's breath caught. His daughter wore a pale dress, too fine for comfort. In her small hands, she clutched the broken doll Jonathan had seen in the surveillance footage, Mr. Buttons. She held it like a lifeline. "Here is my greatest joy," Victoria announced, resting a hand on Sophia's shoulder. The crowd applauded. Cameras snapped. To them, it was perfect. Mother and daughter beneath the chandeliers. But Jonathan saw what others missed. Sophia's shoulders were rigid, her head bowed. She did not smile. She did not wave. When Victoria's hand tightened, nails digging into her arm, Jonathan flinched. He saw the small twist of Sophia's wrist as she tried to ease the pain, and Raven saw it too. The shepherd lunged forward with a snarl that split the ballroom. Heads whipped toward the shadows, startled. Jonathan gripped the collar with both hands, his chest heaving, but Raven's body shook with fury, his growl fixed on Victoria. On stage, her mask slipped. For the briefest second, her smile faltered, her eyes flashing with cold anger as she yanked Sophia's arm higher. Sophia winced, hugging the doll tighter. Then the smile returned, polished and hollow. But Jonathan had seen the truth, and so had Raven. "She's hurting her," Jonathan hissed. Torres's jaw was tight. "I saw it." The gala carried on, laughter and applause resuming, but Jonathan's world had narrowed to that single moment, the yank of a hand, the wince of a child, the snarl of a dog who saw through diamonds and lies. Victoria Hale's mask had cracked. The precinct hummed with routine, typewriters, chatter, the shuffle of papers. But as Miguel Torres walked through, conversations died. Eyes lingered too long before darting away. Inside Captain Rourke's office, blinds cut sunlight into harsh stripes. On the desk lay the evidence. Sophia's photograph, the blood-stained dress, surveillance stills. "You're in too deep," Rourke growled, not looking up. "Do you know how many calls I've fielded? Judges, councilmen, half the board of supervisors. And one name keeps coming up. Victoria Hale." Torres's pulse quickened. Raven lay at his feet, ears pitched forward, body taut. "You planted cameras, pulled in priests, judges, journalists," Rourke snapped. "Do you think she doesn't know? Do you think she doesn't have ears in every corner of this city?" "With respect, Captain, a child's in danger," Torres said evenly. "We have evidence. What you have is a suicide note for your career." Rourke slammed his fist on the desk. "Close the file. Walk away, or you'll lose everything. Badge, pension, the dog." Raven's growl filled the room, low and sharp. Torres leaned forward, voice shaking with fury. "If it were your daughter, would you still tell me to close the file?" For a moment, Rourke's eyes softened. Then he shoved the folder across the desk. "Take it. But when she buries you, don't say I didn't warn you." Torres tucked the folder under his arm. He rose slowly, Raven pressing close. "Then let her come, because I won't abandon the truth." Every eye in the bullpen followed as Torres walked out, whispers trailing him. Jonathan waited in the hall, Kane propped at his side. "What did they say?" Torres exhaled. "They told me to stop, or lose everything." "And?" Torres looked down at Raven, then back at Jonathan. His voice was firm. "And I won't." Jonathan's throat tightened. He gripped Torres's shoulder. "Then you're a better man than most." Raven barked once, sharp and resolute, a vow. That night the storm broke. Wind rattled the shutters of Jonathan's cabin. Only embers glowed on the stove. Jonathan sat hunched at the table, the pink dress spread before him in its plastic bag. The stains were dark, damning. He traced the outline with trembling fingers until the sobs came, raw, tearing, unstoppable. Sophia. Sophia. Her name was a prayer, broken and endless. Raven stirred. The shepherd padded forward and pressed his head into Jonathan's lap. Warmth, steadiness. Jonathan's hand sank into his fur, clinging. "You feel it too, don't you, boy? You know she's hurting." Raven exhaled through his nose, leaning heavier. An anchor in the storm. Jonathan laid the dress across his knees beside Raven's head. His scarred hand caught between the evidence of suffering and the loyalty of a dog. For a long time he stayed that way, tears soaking the shepherd's coat. Finally, he bent low, forehead pressed to Raven's. "We'll bring her home. You and me. They can strip Torres's badge, silence the judge, fire the journalist. But they can't touch you. And they can't touch me. Not where it matters. Raven licked the tears from his cheek, sealing the promise. Jonathan laughed hoarsely through the grief. "You're the only one who still believes in me." The shepherd gave a low whine, tail thumping once, steady and sure. Hours passed before Jonathan leaned back, eyes swollen but burning with something new. Resolve. He pressed a hand to Raven's chest, feeling the steady heartbeat. "You and me, Raven. We don't quit. We won't leave her behind." Raven barked once, the sound echoing through the cabin, a vow carried in fur and firelight. Jonathan slid the dress back into the drawer, his hand lingering on the wood. "That's not the end of her story. Not while I'm still breathing." He sank into his chair, Raven pressed close. Outside, the storm raged, but inside the silence was no longer despair. It was purposeful, father and dog, bound by an unspoken mission, to save the child who still tapped her SOS against the bars of her window. And in the glow of dying embers, Jonathan believed what he whispered into Raven's fur. A father's promise, once made, is unbreakable. The cemetery lay hushed at dusk, rows of tilting headstones awash in fading gold. Jonathan Reed waited on a weathered bench, his cane propped against the stone beside him. At his feet, Raven stood rigid, amber eyes sharp, ears twitching at every sigh of wind. Torres had told him the old gardener insisted on meeting here, away from Victoria Hale's reach. Jonathan's chest tightened. It felt too much like a meeting among ghosts. At last, Alfredo Ruiz appeared, shoulders bent from years among roses and soil. His cracked hands trembled as he shuffled down the path, eyes darting like prey that feared the trees themselves might betray him. "Senor Reed," Alfredo rasped, voice hoarse with fear. "I should not be here." Jonathan pushed himself upright, pain shooting through his leg. "Thank you for coming. If they learn I spoke with you, I lose everything. My job, my pension, perhaps worse." Alfredo's eyes shone. "But I cannot hold this any longer." Raven moved closer, growling low. Jonathan soothed him with a hand. "He's with me. You can trust him." Alfredo's hands shook as he pulled a small bundle from his coat, but he did not hand it over yet. His voice faltered. "I was trimming the roses by the side wall. The window above was open. I heard your little girl." His throat closed. "She was begging, Senor Reed, begging for food." Jonathan staggered as though struck, clutching his cane to stay upright. Hunger, the word carved into his chest. He had feared neglect, cruelty, but starvation. His daughter's cries for scraps, while Victoria flaunted her wealth, shattered something inside him. Tears blurred his vision. "God, my baby girl." Alfredo extended the cloth bundle. "I could not disobey Senora's orders, but I found this in the soil near the hydrangeas. She must have slipped it through the bars, hidden it, hoping someone would see." Jonathan unwrapped it with trembling fingers. Inside lay a child's drawing. Rough lines, smudged pencil. A man with a cane, a girl with pigtails, a dog between them, hands joined beneath a blazing sun. Jonathan dropped to the bench, clutching the drawing to his chest, sobs racking him. Sophia. She still remembers. Raven pressed his head into Jonathan's lap, whining low, his gaze fixed on the sketch. As though he too recognized himself. As though he too heard the message Sophia had buried in the earth. "She has not forgotten you," Alfredo whispered. "She waits." Jonathan traced the shaky lines with his finger, each one a lifeline stretched between them. She had drawn him strong, standing tall, hand in hers. She still believed he would come. "I will, Soph," he whispered fiercely. "I'll bring you home." Alfredo lowered his gaze. "The Senora has eyes everywhere, but I will help, quietly." Jonathan lifted his tear-streaked face, fire burning beneath the grief. "You've already given me proof she hasn't given up. That's all the strength I need." Alfredo nodded and shuffled away, swallowed by dusk. Jonathan sat clutching the fragile drawing, Raven's warmth steady beside him. A cemetery was a place of endings, but in his hands was a beginning, a vow reborn in pencil lines and a child's faith. That night, mist clung heavy as Torres guided the unmarked sedan off-road, headlights off. The Hale mansion loomed ahead, a predator crouched in fog. Security lights cut harsh slices through the haze, illuminating hedges and iron fences. Jonathan sat stiff in the passenger seat, Sophia's drawing in his pocket, his compass. In the back, Raven quivered, nose pressed against the glass, muscles taut. Torres killed the engine. "He's onto something." "Then we follow," Jonathan whispered. They slipped into the mist. Raven padded low and silent, his movements purposeful. He wasn't guessing. He was tracking. Suddenly, the shepherd froze. Hackles up, ears forward, a growl rumbling deep. Jonathan and Torres crouched behind him. Ahead, vines swallowed a section of wall, concealing a narrow service door, painted to disappear. Raven pressed his nose to the seam, scratching, then cocked his head. Jonathan held his breath. Then, faint, muffled, a cough, small, weak, a child's cough. His heart stopped. He stumbled forward, pressing both palms to the cold metal. "Sophia," he whispered, breaking. "It's me." Torres yanked him back into shadow. "Careful. If they hear—" But Jonathan shoved him off, forehead against steel, tears streaming. "She's in there. That's my baby." Raven barked once, sharp and contained, his body braced against the door as if ready to tear it down. Torres crouched, running hands along the frame. "Reinforced, no handle, only opens inside," he cursed. "But this is it. This proves she's kept like a prisoner." Jonathan slid down the wall, his daughter's cough echoing in his skull. "She's right there, Miguel, feet away, and I can't touch her." Torres gripped his shoulder. "Listen to me. Raven found this door for a reason. Tonight he gave us more than despair. He gave us direction. Which wing, which floor. When we take this to a judge, it won't be rumor. It'll be precision." Jonathan pressed his hand flat against the seam, whispering, "Hold on, sweetheart. Daddy's here." Another cough answered, faint but alive. Jonathan rose, leaning hard on his cane, his voice steady now. "She's alive." "That's enough to keep me breathing until she's free." Torres's jaw tightened. "Next time we're at this door, it won't stay closed." Raven stamped his paws once, imprinting the spot into memory, then led them back into the fog. Jonathan followed, every step carved with fire, the cough echoing behind him like a promise. Days later, the cabin felt less like shelter and more like a war room. The kitchen table vanished under evidence, sworn statements, photographs, recordings. Torres's laptop glowed in the dark, flickering with grainy footage. Sophia tapping SOS on her window bars. Sophia clutching a broken doll. Sophia's thin frame framed in glass, while her mother smiled for cameras below. Jonathan laid Sophia's drawing atop the pile, beside a blood-stained dress and a photo of bruises. His hand trembled. "This isn't evidence. It's her life." Raven lay by the stove, eyes fixed on the table, whining softly as if urging them on. Torres typed furiously. Gardner's testimony. Father Gabriel's statement. And Amelia's ready to publish when we give the word. Add the backdoor location, the cough. We've got enough. Jonathan's scarred hand closed into a fist. If this doesn't open the walls, nothing will. The next morning, they climbed courthouse steps under gray sky. Torres carrying the swollen folder, Jonathan limping, Raven steady at his side. Inside Judge Carter's chambers, Torres laid it all out, piece by piece, word by word. No theatrics, only truth. The recording of Sophia's faint taps echoed through the room. Tap, pause. Tap, tap, pause. SOS, Torres confirmed. Carter frowned, leaning forward. Morse code. Jonathan's voice cracked. She's my daughter. She's begging to be saved. They showed the photos, the sworn testimonies, the map of the hidden door. Finally, silence hung heavy. Carter leaned back, fingers steepled, unreadable. You realize what you're asking, the judge said gravely. A raid on one of the most powerful women in this state. If you're wrong, Mr. Reed, you lose everything. Officer Torres, you lose your badge. Jonathan's voice shook, but his words held steady. I've already lost everything except her. I'd rather burn what's left of my life fighting than live one more day doing nothing. Raven barked once, sharp as a gavel. Carter startled, staring into the shepherd's amber eyes, unyielding, loyal, fierce. The judge exhaled slowly, removed his glasses, and signed. The scratch of his pen was thunder. He slid the warrant across the desk. Bring her out, and pray you're in time. Jonathan's knees nearly gave. Torres steadied him, but tears blurred his vision. Relief and terror warred in his chest. He dropped a trembling hand into Raven's fur. We're coming, Soph. Just hold on. For the first time, the law stood with them. And for the first time, Victoria Hale's empire had a crack wide enough for truth to break through. The night air was sharp, the kind that carried sound farther than it should. From the hilltop road, the Hale estate glowed like a fortress. Iron gates stretching wide, security lights sweeping the grounds in mechanical rhythm. But tonight, silence gave way to engines growling low and officers murmuring in clipped tones. Jonathan Reed stood among them, leaning heavily on his cane, his heart hammering against his ribs. In his pocket lay Sophia's drawing, folded soft from too much handling. Against his leg pressed Raven, body coiled, amber eyes locked on the black silhouette of the gates below. Torres checked his radio one last time. Warrant signed, Judge Carter's orders in hand. We move on my mark. His voice was steady, though his jaw was tight. Jonathan whispered into the dark, almost to himself. Hold on, Sophia. Just a little longer. Torres raised his hand. Go. Engines roared. Police vehicles surged forward, headlights slicing mist, tires grinding gravel. The lead cruiser slammed the iron gates, steel clashing like thunder. Bars buckled, then split wide. The estate erupted. Guards in black uniforms poured from the shadows, flashlights cutting beams through fog. Voices barked orders. Hold the line, Torres shouted. Officers advanced, shields raised. Before the first clash, Raven leapt. The shepherd's muscles launched him like a missile. He hit the chest of the first guard with bone-cracking force, snarling so deep it rattled the night. The man fell hard, weapons spinning across the grass. The sight froze the guards, an animal unshackled, fury incarnate. The police line surged through the hesitation. Jonathan stumbled forward, cane sinking into churned earth, his voice breaking loose. Sophia! His cry cut through the chaos, raw and desperate. From the mansion's upper windows, a light flickered. Jonathan's chest seized. He thought. No, he swore. He saw a shadow move. "Sophia!" His voice cracked, but he forced it louder, shoving her name into the night. Raven disengaged from the fallen guard, circling back, hackles still high. His ears flicked toward the house, nose lifted as if he too had caught the sound Jonathan prayed for. The lawn became a battlefield, boots tearing grass into mud, shields colliding with batons, radios crackling sharp orders. The pristine calm of Hale's empire dissolved under flashing sirens and shouted commands. Torres shoved through, grabbing Jonathan's arm. "Stay behind me!" But Jonathan shook him off, fire burning in his eyes. "Not tonight. Not when she's in there." Torres saw it. The same fire that once carried Jonathan through smoke and flame. He gave a sharp nod. "Then stay close." The mansion loomed as they pressed forward. Officers breached side gates, scaled walls, cut through resistance. Raven bounded ahead, bark splitting the night, each one aimed at the truth. Jonathan's throat tore as he shouted one more time. "Sophia!" And then, stillness. From deep inside, faint but unmistakable, came a child's cry. "Daddy!" Jonathan froze. Tears blurred his vision, his cane slipping in the mud. Raven pressed against his leg, steadying him. His chest cracked wide open with a sob, half anguish, half joy. "She's there," he gasped. "She's alive." Torres's radio snapped to his lips. "All units, breach the mansion. Now." Officers surged, battering down locks, smashing doors. Victoria Hale's empire shuddered under the force of law. Inside, the grand staircase shook, with boots pounding upward. Chandeliers rattled, their crystals clinking like brittle bones. The air reeked of fear and dust. Jonathan struggled to keep pace, his cane slipping on polished steps, but nothing could stop him now. Raven bounded ahead, weaving through officers, his barks echoing off marble. Torres caught Jonathan's arm on the landing. "Stay close!" But Jonathan ripped free, eyes burning. "She's here. I can feel her." Raven sprinted down the hall, claws scraping hardwood. He froze at the far door, body stiffening, hackles raised. With a snarl, he hurled himself against the wood. Officers formed up. "Clear the hall. Breach position." Jonathan pushed through, pressing his ear to the door. Silence stretched, then a faint cough, fragile and small. His knees nearly gave. "Sophia." Raven clawed the wood, his fury exploding into a violent rhythm, snapping teeth, pounding weight, splinters flying. Hinges rattled under the onslaught. Torres barked, "Battering ram!" But before it reached them, Raven's rage tore the lock apart. With a scream of metal and wood, the door burst open. The room beyond was cold and dark, curtains drawn tight. Bars covered the windows. The air smelled of mildew and despair. Huddled against the far wall beneath a thin blanket sat Sophia. Her doll clutched to her chest, her frame trembling, her face pale. For a moment she froze at the crash, then her eyes lifted. Recognition dawned like sunrise. "Daddy!" Jonathan dropped his cane, crawling across the boards. He gathered her into his arms, clutching her as if she might vanish. Tears streamed down his face. "Sophia! Baby girl!" Her sobs broke free. "You came. You came. I'll never let you go again." His lips pressed her hair, his words breaking into it. "Never." Raven pushed into the room, circling tight, his body trembling with relief and fury. He pressed his head against Sophia's shoulder, whining low. She reached out with a trembling hand, burying her fingers in his fur. "Raven." The shepherd licked her palm, amber eyes softening. It was as if he too had been waiting. Jonathan pulled back just enough to see her face, pale but still shining with light. "I'm so sorry, Soph. I should have come sooner. I should never have let them take you." Sophia shook her head fiercely, clinging tight. "I knew you'd come. I prayed. I drew pictures. I tapped the window." Jonathan's throat closed. She had fought for him with every scrap of hope. Tonight, hope had been answered. Behind them, Torres's order rang. "Room secured. The child recovered. Medics now." But Jonathan barely heard. His world had narrowed to her heartbeat against his chest and the dog standing guard before the door. The echo of heels cut through the chaos. "What in God's name is happening in my house?" Victoria Hale stood framed in the doorway, emerald gown glittering, diamonds catching flashlight beams. The perfect smile was gone. What remained was venom. Officers swung their cameras and radios toward her. The mask was cracking. Jonathan rose, his scarred hands trembling as he pulled Sophia tighter. She buried her face into his jacket. Raven stepped forward, growl rumbling low, eyes fixed on Victoria. "You have no right!" she shrieked, voice sharp enough to cut glass. She stabbed a manicured finger at Jonathan. "That man is nothing. A broken addict. A failure. He's manipulating you all." Her fury ricocheted, but no one moved. The evidence had already been spoken. Jonathan's voice thundered back, hoarse but unyielding. "You starved her. You locked her in this room. And you dare call me a failure?" Victoria sneered. "She was weak. I was teaching her discipline." Raven's snarl erupted, shaking the hall. His body lowered, teeth bared, every muscle promising violence. Sophia whimpered, clutching Jonathan tighter. Victoria's hysteria sharpened. "Lies. All lies. I built this empire. You will not destroy it." Torres stepped forward, badge flashing. His voice was a blade. "Mrs. Hale, you are under investigation. Everything you say is recorded. I suggest you stop." But Victoria only screamed louder. "She is my child." "You'll take her over my dead body." Jonathan's reply roared back, fueled by every broken night. "She was never yours to break." Raven snapped his teeth, a sound like judgment itself. The officers didn't hold him back. He wasn't attacking. He was pronouncing the end of her reign. Sophia's small voice cracked through the storm. "Daddy, don't let her hurt me again." Jonathan bent, kissing her hair. "Never again, baby. Never." Two officers stepped in, gripping Victoria's arms. She writhed, shrieking, diamonds clattering against the floor. "You'll regret this. All of you. You don't know who you're dealing with." Her voice echoed as they dragged her down the hall, her gown tearing, her empire unraveling. Silence fell. Radios hissed. Flashlights swept. But in the heart of the storm, there was only a father, his daughter, and a dog who would never let darkness near them again. Raven pressed close, growl fading to a hum. His body curled around Sophia like a shield, his eyes still burning at the door. Jonathan sank to his knees, rocking her gently. Tears streamed, but his voice was steady now. "You're safe, Soph. You're safe." Her hand reached for Raven's fur, trembling fingers curling tight. The shepherd leaned into her, exhaling a soft whine that was part comfort, part vow. The mansion of lies had fallen, and in its ruins, truth stood unbroken. The storm of sirens, cameras, and shouted orders was over. Behind them, the Hale mansion stood fractured, its walls stripped of silence, its empire of lies cracked wide. Now, the night was quiet again. Jonathan Reed's cabin, once only a tomb for loneliness, became something else entirely. The stove glowed with a gentle firelight. The air smelled of pine and smoke. And for the first time in years, its wooden walls sheltered more than his grief. They sheltered his daughter. Sophia slept on the bed Jonathan had carefully prepared. Pillows stacked high, blankets tucked around her fragile frame. She was still so small, curled around the ragged doll she had clutched through captivity. Her hair spilled across the pillow in tangled strands, her cheeks pale but peaceful. At the foot of the bed, Raven lay curved like a living shield. His head rested on his paws, ears twitching at every creak of the cabin. His eyes never closed. Amber and unblinking, they stayed fixed on Sophia, a sentinel who refused to surrender his watch. Jonathan sat in a chair by the bed. His scarred hands were clasped, his shoulders slumped, exhaustion dragging at every bone. But he would not look away. For hours, he simply watched her breathe, each rise and fall a miracle he had almost lost forever. When Sophia whimpered, her small hand twitching in dream, Jonathan leaned forward. "I'm here, baby." His whisper cracked. "Daddy's right here." Her eyes fluttered open, glazed with confusion. A tear slid down her cheek. "Don't leave me again." Jonathan's chest broke open. He caught her hand, pressing it tight between his palms. "Never, Sophia. Never again." Raven stirred, lifting his head. He nosed gently at her arm, then laid his chin on the mattress with a low whine. Sophia's trembling fingers slipped into his fur. "Raven too," she whispered, her lips curving into the faintest smile. Jonathan's tears spilled freely. "He won't leave either. He's yours as much as he's mine." Her eyes drifted shut again, her body softening into trust, cradled between her father's vow and Raven's warmth. Jonathan leaned close, kissing her forehead. "Sleep, sweetheart. You're home now." Raven shifted, curling tighter against the bed. His tail thumped once against the floorboards, a silent vow. And for the first time in years, the cabin held not grief, but life. Word spread quickly through the town. By week's end, Jonathan's lonely exile had become a place of gathering. It began with baskets left quietly on the porch, warm loaves, jars of honey, sweaters knitted by hands that had long since raised their own children. No one knocked, no one intruded. They left their gifts in silence, letting the gesture itself speak. "We see you. We stand with you." Each time Jonathan opened the door, his chest tightened. For years the town had whispered about him, avoiding his shadow. Now they came. And the walls of his cabin, once suffocating, echoed with belonging. Torres came often, sometimes in uniform, sometimes not. He never arrived empty-handed. Books for Sophia, firewood stacked neatly, or nothing more than his steady presence. He leaned on the porch rail, while Raven bounded across the yard with Sophia, her laughter carrying like bells into the crisp air. Sophia's change was slow, fragile, but clear. At first, she clung to Jonathan, her eyes darting at every sound. But Raven never left her side. Wherever she went, porch, stream, meadow, he followed. At night, when nightmares shook her awake, It was Raven's head pressed against her chest that calmed her trembling. Jonathan often woke to find her curled into the shepherd, her hand tangled in his fur, her face softened into peace. Jonathan would sit in the chair nearby, watching, his heart breaking and mending all at once. Every time, he whispered a thank you to the dog who had become not just protector, but healer. One afternoon, Father Gabriel climbed the porch steps, his weathered hands gripping the rail. He carried no basket, only a small vial of holy water and the calm gravity of a man who had seen both cruelty and grace. Jonathan opened the door, startled. "Father, I didn't expect—" "I told you," Gabriel said gently, his eyes falling to Sophia, who sat cross-legged on the floor with Raven's head in her lap. "My doors are always open. But sometimes the blessing must come to the home." Jonathan stepped aside, throat tight. The priest sprinkled water across the doorframe, his voice low but steady. "May this house be a place of peace. May it shield those within. May it hold back the shadows that once haunted it." Droplets caught sunlight spilling through the window, glittering like shards of grace. Sophia watched with wide eyes. When Gabriel finished, he bent toward her, knees creaking. His gaze shifted to the shepherd sprawled at her feet. "Sometimes," he said softly, "angels don't have wings. Sometimes they have 4 legs." Sophia smiled faintly. She bent her head against Raven's fur. "I know," she whispered. Jonathan's eyes blurred. The priest touched his shoulder firmly. "Scars are proof of survival. With love, even scars can become light." As Gabriel left, Jonathan stood on the porch long after, Sophia clutching his sleeve, Raven pressed against his leg. He looked out across the valley, where the sun dipped crimson and gold, and felt something stir inside him for the first time in years. Hope. Morning came clear and still. Jonathan stood just beyond the porch, his cane set aside, his hands resting on Sophia's small shoulders. She leaned into him, quilt wrapped tight, hair tousled from sleep. In her other hand she clutched the ragged doll, its fabric stirring in the dawn breeze. At their feet, Raven sat tall, ears pitched forward, amber eyes fixed on the horizon. Even in peace, his body hummed with vigilance, tail sweeping the grass in slow rhythm. The sky shifted from grey to rose to gold. For years, Jonathan had watched sunrises with nothing but emptiness. But this one was different. His daughter breathed at his side, alive, free. "Do you see it, Soph?" His voice was rough, hushed. She nodded slowly. "It's beautiful." Tears burned Jonathan's eyes. He bent, kneeling despite the pain in his leg, until his scarred hands framed her face. "So are you. And I'll never leave you again. Never." She collapsed into his arms, her small arms clinging to his neck. Raven pressed against them both, his warmth binding the circle. For a long moment, they stayed like that. Father, daughter, and dog, wrapped together, as the sun climbed. Sophia's whisper floated into his chest. "We're home, Daddy." Jonathan kissed her hair, voice breaking but sure. "Yes, sweetheart. We're home." Raven barked once, sharp and resolute, sealing the vow. And as the valley filled with birdsong, Jonathan knew one truth would endure. This family, battered but unbreakable, had stepped from shadow into light, and nothing, not wealth, nor power, nor fear, would tear them apart again. Sometimes the greatest lessons about love, loyalty, and forgiveness don't come from people at all, but from the steady eyes of a dog who refuses to leave our side. German Shepherds, with their courage and devotion, remind us that family isn't just about blood. It's about the bonds we choose and the ones that never break. If this story touched your heart, maybe it's also a gentle nudge to spend an extra moment with your own dog, to notice how much they give without ever asking in return. I came across a resource that shares thoughtful ways to deepen that connection. There's no pressure, just something that feels worth passing along, the way a friend might share a good book or a favorite trail. Because at the end of the day, the time we spend with them, the love we give back, is what truly matters. And if you believe in second chances, in loyalty that endures, and in the quiet healing power of a dog's love, then you already know you're not alone here.